Hey all, Alex here, at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today it is time for a review of the 1995 biography by David Herbert Donald Lincoln. David Herbert Donald, born in Mississippi, studied history at Millsaps College, then got his doctorate at the University of Illinois, taught at a number of preeminent institutions, including the Harvard University for a substantial period of time, and made himself a career during that time in the writing of biographies. Donald has won two Pulitzer Prizes for biography. He won one in 1961 with his work Charles Sumner and the Coming of the Civil War. And he also won in 1988 for his work Look Homeward, A Life of Thomas Wolfe, the early 20th century American novelist. So Donald, right away, when we talk about kind of the setup of this book, is coming into this as a preeminent biographer. He is one of our most acclaimed and I think most accomplished biographers that we have talked about, really probably on the channel in general. And as is implied by his study of Sumner in particular, very deep background in the Civil War, and a deep knowledge of the history of Abraham Lincoln. His first ever book was on Lincoln. And as a result, this 1995 volume here feels like a culmination of a career in a sense. It's, I believe, the last major biography that he wrote before his passing in 2009. And this book right away, I think, the David Herbert Donald volume on Lincoln has retained this place as being lauded among the very best Lincoln biographies, certainly the very best one-volume Lincoln biographies. And unlike the two other volumes that we've reviewed in this series so far, the Carl Sandburg volume and the Stephen B. Oates volume, this one seems to have retained its notoriety pretty substantially, both among the general public in the sense that you can still buy it new in bookstores, and among critics and among Lincoln scholars. In fact, if you were to go to any list of the best single-volume Lincoln biographies, this one is probably going to be at or near the top even to this day, which is a pretty impressive accomplishment overall. Now, right off the bat, I will say this. This is, to me, very clearly the best of the three books that I have read so far in this series. I am not entirely sure if it's going to remain that way. Of course, we still have quite a few more to go. But right away, I think the strengths of the Donald volume are exactly what I needed after some of the issues that I had with the Sandburg and the Oates volumes. The writing in the Donald volume is very much kind of to the point, fact-oriented. This is very much an historian's book, so it's not necessarily as reliant on the tall tales and the yarns that Carl Sandburg has in his volume. And I think this work is a little bit longer. It's certainly longer than the Oates volume, clocking in at about 600 pages or so of straight-up text. And because of that, the length of the book allows the actual stories and the background on Lincoln himself to kind of matriculate. It gives them space. And that's something that the Oates volume does not really have in any way. Also, no plagiarism accusations surrounding David Herbert Donald, at least that I know of. So that's a good start. I think as far as how Donald portrays Lincoln, I think it is, again, a respectful portrayal. I've not found one portrayal of Lincoln in any of these books that is completely, that I think is completely off base. I think even the sort of hagiography, if you will, the lauding of Lincoln in the Sandburg volume, I think is appropriate in some way, even if it is romanticized. And I don't think Donald is any different from Oates in that he portrays the president kind of warts and all. There's an interesting website, which I don't think I've really talked much about on this channel, called bestpresidentialbios.com. But it's maintained by a guy named Stephen Floyd. And one of the kind of issues that he has with this book, even though he thinks very highly of it, is in how it portrays Lincoln not necessarily as a person who was always in control of the situation, but as a person who was more so kind of swept up in the currents of the time, someone who was a more passive leader. And that's where I think this book differs from the Oates volume in particular. I think the Oates volume very much wants to portray Lincoln as a strong leader. I maybe agree on some level, but I also don't necessarily think that that's an inaccuracy. I think you have to portray both sides of the man. I think it's very evident that this is someone who was clearly decisive in many ways, and his decisiveness and his willingness to take control was a huge part of why the Union won the Civil War. But I also think you have to understand the limitations of the man, and you have to understand that his own background did not prepare him for the kind of all the multifaceted pieces of it. Yes, he educated himself on military strategy and that sort of thing, but he was not an experienced war general or anything like that, the way that some of our other presidents have been. And that was part of why he had a contentious relationship with the Union commanders for a big chunk of his presidency. So I think you have to kind of paint both sides of it. And I do like some elements, not even directly related to the Civil War, that this book talks about, where it kind of paints how Lincoln's knowledge and his focus in these specific areas was kind of balanced by his ignorance in other areas. I think this book in particular does a really good job at painting, even in just a few pages, the description of the kind of indigenous, the kind of Native American policies that were happening at the time. Of course, the massacres that were going on in Minnesota during the Civil War. I think this book, at least from what I remember, does the best job at addressing those and understanding that Lincoln really kind of didn't give a shit about what was going on, did not really have any sort of nuanced understanding of Native American policy or any piece of that. And as a result, isn't afraid of holding him accountable for the kind of fallout of that tragic and awful situation. So a lot of successes here. Now, another kind of point that I've seen people talk about with this book that's maybe a pause for them as far as recommending it for the first time Lincoln explorer is the language, is the writing in it. Now, I might be someone who is, just kind of accustomed to very kind of scholarly language and very dry books. I don't think that Donald's writing in here is anything close to the worst that I've seen. I think this is actually fairly engaging stuff. I agree that, again, he's not exactly the storyteller that Sandberg is. Again, I don't want to repeat that point throughout all these other reviews, but chances are that's going to be the case. But I think he's effective. I think he's efficient. I don't think he gets lost in the weeds of anything in particular. And I think most people, if you were to pick up this book, especially if you picked up other kind of popular biographies of famous figures and got through them just fine, I don't expect you would have an issue with it. I think the only situation where I could see you maybe having some struggles with it are, maybe if you tried to read Ron Chernow's book on Washington. Like if you tried to read Ron Chernow's Washington biography and you were like, that's too dry for me, I need something like Alexis Coe or something, which is not a diss because I think the Coe book is fantastic, but that's clearly a lot more like engaging in its delivery. It's entirely meant to be. Like if that's your perspective, then yeah, I might not recommend this because I do think Chernow is a more engaging writer than Donald is. But again, I don't think it's that difficult. And for me, I felt like the length of the book was not really a barrier in any way. So all in all, Yeah, I think this book succeeds. This is the first of these three books that I would say, without a doubt, I wholeheartedly recommend. I am curious. Again, there will be a ranking of these Lincoln biographies coming at the end of this kind of video series. So we'll kind of see how well this book matches up. I still think there are a couple of other ones in the coming volumes here that I think will be difficult to beat, that I think will give it some competition. But right away, I can say that I think, especially for a book that is, closing in on being 30 years old, I think the Donald volume here holds up very well, especially because it's very easy to find. I picked up this one for $3 at a used bookstore, so I mean, you'll find these books everywhere. So as far as being accessible, as far as being informative, as far as being financially available and widely available, I think the Donald volume is a really good starting point for a lot of people. And I think that if this does end up being your first step in, even if there are other volumes that might serve you better that we might come to, I don't think you'll be disappointed by it. So that's all I got to say. Highly recommend it. With that, I want to thank you all so much for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more reviews are to come. Make sure to hit that bell for notifications and tell a friend as well. It really helps. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.